At brunch, my daughter-in-law said, "Let's make this the last year we pretend she's part of the family." I stayed quiet. Those words hit me like a physical blow, but I kept my face neutral, my hands steady around my coffee cup. Sarah thought I hadn't heard her. She was wrong. I'm Margaret, and at 65, I thought I understood my place in this family. For 3 years since Robert's death, I've tried to fill the void he left behind, not just in my own life, but in holding everyone together. Every month, we gather at the country club for brunch. It started as my idea, a way to maintain family bonds. Now I realize it's become another obligation, another burden they tolerate because I pay for it. Sarah was speaking to her sister-in-law Jennifer, my son David's cousin's wife. They thought I was distracted, reading the menu for the 100th time. I wasn't. I heard every single word. She just sits there. You know, like she's waiting for us to entertain her. Sarah continued, her voice low but not low enough. Before we continue, comment where you're watching from and subscribe to the channel. We'd love to see how far our stories are reaching. David feels obligated, but honestly, it's exhausting. She's so needy. Needy. The word echoed in my mind. I've been paying for these brunches for 3 years. I've been covering David and Sarah's mortgage for 18 months since David's consulting business hit rough patches. I paid for Emma's private school tuition, for the family vacation to Hilton Head, for Sarah's car payments when hers was repossessed. Maybe we could just gradually phase her out, Jennifer suggested, cutting her eggs Benedict with surgical precision. You know, make excuses. She'd get the hint eventually. Sarah nodded enthusiastically. Exactly. David won't like it at first, but he'll see it's for the best. We need our space to be a real family without constantly walking on eggshells around her feelings. I took a careful sip of my coffee, proud that my hands weren't shaking. Walking on eggshells around my feelings? I hadn't expressed a single need or complaint in months. If anything, I'd been the one walking on eggshells, trying so hard not to be a burden that I'd apparently become invisible. The irony wasn't lost on me. Here they were, planning my exclusion while sitting at a table I was paying for, wearing clothes bought with money I'd given them, discussing the private school tuition I covered every semester. The thing is, Sarah lowered her voice even more, she has all this money just sitting there. Robert left her everything, and she's not even spending it on herself. She could travel, find hobbies, make friends her own age. Instead, she clings to us. Clings to them. I almost laughed. Every interaction felt like I was the one being imposed upon. David would call when they needed something, and I'd provide it without question. Sarah would make plans that conveniently required my financial contribution, and I'd write the check. When did generosity become clinging? She could hire a companion or something, Jennifer added. Rich widows do that all the time. Someone to go to museums with, play bridge. She doesn't need to rely on family for everything. Everything. What exactly was everything? Seeing my granddaughter Emma once a week? Being invited to holidays in my own son's house? Paying for the privilege of their occasional company? Emma, my 15-year-old granddaughter, was the only one who seemed genuinely happy to see me anymore. But even she was becoming distant lately, probably influenced by whatever Sarah said about me at home. Children absorb these attitudes like sponges. I just think, Sarah continued, that it would be healthier for everyone if she found her own life. We could still see her occasionally, but this weekly obligation thing has to stop. Obligation. There it was, the truth finally spoken aloud. I wasn't family to them. I was an obligation, a wealthy, lonely widow they had to manage and tolerate. David arrived then, kissing Sarah's cheek and sliding into the booth beside her. He glanced at me with that smile he'd perfected over the years, the one that looked loving but felt dutiful. Sorry I'm late, Mom. How are you doing? I'm fine, dear. My voice sounded normal, even to me. Years of practice, I suppose. How's the Morrison account coming along? He launched into the familiar complaints about his work, the difficulties of building a client base, the pressure of overhead costs, the same conversations we'd had for months, with the same implied requests for help that I always fulfilled without being directly asked. Sarah had resumed her bright hostess persona, the one she wore when I was paying attention. She asked about my garden, my book club, my volunteer work at the library, all the appropriate questions that showed she cared, when 5 minutes earlier she'd been planning my exile. I answered pleasantly, watching their faces, seeing them clearly for perhaps the first time. David looked tired, stressed about money as always. Sarah looked bored but determined to play her part. Jennifer kept glancing at her phone, probably wishing she were anywhere else. These people didn't love me. They tolerated me because I was useful. The realization should have devastated me, but instead I felt something unexpected. Relief. For 3 years, I'd been trying to earn something that was never available in the first place. When the check came, I reached for it automatically, as I always did. As I signed my name, I wondered what would happen if I simply stopped. Not dramatically, not with explanations or confrontations, just stopped. Same time next month? Sarah asked brightly as we prepared to leave. Of course, I replied, knowing with absolute certainty that there wouldn't be a next month. Not like this. As we parted ways in the parking lot, Sarah hugged me with the same artificial warmth she'd shown all morning. Love you, Margaret. Drive safely. I got into my car and sat there for a moment, watching them leave in the BMW I'd helped David finance. They were probably already discussing how well they'd managed me today, how they'd successfully maintained the pretense for another month. That evening, I sat in Robert's study, looking at the bank statements spread across his old mahogany desk. The numbers told a story I'd been too generous to see clearly before. In 3 years, I'd given them over $200,000 in direct payments, loans that were never repaid, and gifts that conveniently coincided with their financial emergencies. I wasn't their mother or grandmother anymore. I was their personal bank. And banks, I realized, could always close accounts. For the first time since Robert's death, I felt something that might have been hope. Tomorrow, things were going to be very different. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in Robert's leather chair until dawn, surrounded by papers that told the story of my own financial bleeding. Bank statements, canceled checks, transfer receipts, the evidence of 3 years of systematic exploitation laid out in neat piles across the desk. Robert would have been furious. Not at David, though he should have been, but at me for allowing it to happen. Margaret, I could hear his voice. You're not helping them by making their lives too easy. You're crippling them. He'd said something similar when David was 25 and asked us to co-sign for his first business loan. Robert had refused. He needs to sink or swim on his own merit. I'd thought my husband was being too harsh then. Now I understood he'd been protecting our son from exactly what had happened since his death. At 6 in the morning, I made coffee and opened my laptop. The online banking portal showed every automatic payment I'd set up over the past 3 years. David's mortgage, $2,047 monthly. Emma's private school, $1,250 monthly. Sarah's car payment, $486 monthly. The family cell phone plan, $340 monthly. Even their lawn service, $120 monthly. I'd been so gradual about taking on these expenses that I'd never added them up. Nearly $5,000 every month, flowing out of my accounts into their lives. $60,000 a year. $200,000 over 3 years, not counting the emergencies and gifts. My hands hovered over the keyboard. One by one, I could cancel every automatic payment. It would take less than 10 minutes to undo 3 years of financial dependency, but something held me back. Not love, exactly. Fear, maybe. Fear of their anger, their disappointment. Fear of becoming the villain in their story. Fear of admitting to myself that my own son would choose money over his mother. I closed the laptop and walked to the kitchen, needing distance from those numbers. But the house felt different now, like a stage set for a play that had already ended. Every room held memories of Robert, but also evidence of how I'd tried to fill his absence with generosity that nobody appreciated. The refrigerator was covered with Emma's school photos, her honor roll certificates, her acceptance letter to the summer music camp I'd paid for. She was the only one who still seemed to genuinely enjoy my company. But even that was changing. Last week, when I'd picked her up from school, she'd asked if I was okay with money. Why do you ask, sweetheart? Mom says you might not be able to help with things anymore because you're getting older and might need to be more careful. Sarah was already preparing Emma for my financial withdrawal. The manipulation was more sophisticated than I'd realized. They weren't just taking my money. They were controlling the narrative about why it might stop. By noon, I was back at the computer. This time, I didn't hesitate. I canceled the mortgage payment first. The system asked if I was sure. I clicked yes. Then the school tuition. Yes. The car payment. Yes. One by one, every automatic transfer disappeared from my account. It felt like cutting invisible chains. But I didn't stop there. I called my financial advisor, someone Robert had trusted completely. Margaret, what can I do for you today? I want to review my estate planning. James, all of it. Of course. Is there something specific you're concerned about? I paused, choosing my words carefully. I want to make sure my assets are protected and going to people who will truly benefit from them. We can certainly review everything. Would you like to schedule an appointment this week? Today, if possible. There was a pause. Is everything all right, Margaret? You sound different. Everything is fine. I'm just thinking more clearly than I have in a long time. That afternoon, I sat in James's office, learning things about my own financial situation that I'd let Robert handle entirely during our marriage. I was wealthier than I'd realized. And more importantly, I had complete control over every penny. The trust fund you and Robert established for Emma can't be touched until she's 25, James explained. That was very wise planning. As for the rest of your assets, you have complete discretion. What about the house? Fully paid, completely in your name. Robert made sure of that after his diagnosis. My husband had been smarter than I'd given him credit for. He'd protected me, and indirectly, he'd protected Emma's future. But he'd also left me with the responsibility of protecting myself from our own son. I want to make some changes to my will, I said. James raised an eyebrow but pulled out a legal pad. What kind of changes? I want to create a scholarship fund at the community college. Robert always believed in education for everyone, not just those who could afford private schools. That's wonderful, Margaret. How much were you thinking? Half of my liquid assets. About $400,000. James set down his pen. Margaret, that's a significant decision. Have you discussed this with David? No, and I'm not going to. I have to ask, is there a problem with your relationship with your son? I considered the question seriously. There's a problem with his relationship with me. He sees me as a source of money, not as his mother. I want to change that dynamic. Are you sure you don't want to think about this for a few days? I've been thinking about it for 3 years, James. I just didn't realize it until yesterday. As I drove home that evening, I felt lighter than I had since Robert's funeral. The automatic payments were canceled. My will was being rewritten. Tomorrow, the real consequences would begin. But tonight, for the first time in 3 years, I wasn't worried about anyone else's financial problems. I ordered Chinese takeout, opened a bottle of wine, and sat on my back porch watching the sunset. My phone buzzed with a text from David. Thanks for lunch today, Mom. Sarah really enjoyed catching up with you. I stared at the message for a long time before responding. It was enlightening. He probably thought I was talking about the conversation. He had no idea how enlightening it had really been. Tomorrow, the first payment would fail to go through. David would probably call, confused and slightly annoyed. He'd expect me to fix it immediately, the way I always did. Instead, I was going to let him figure out what it felt like to solve his own problems. For the first time since Robert's death, I was looking forward to tomorrow. The call came exactly when I expected it. Tuesday morning, 9:47 a.m. David's name on my phone screen, and I could practically feel his confusion through the device. I let it ring 4 times before answering, taking my time to water the orchids Robert had loved so much. Hi, David. Mom. Hey. Listen, I think there might be some kind of banking error. The mortgage payment didn't go through yesterday, and when I called them, they said the automatic transfer was canceled. I continued watering, watching the droplets gather on the delicate petals. Oh my. That is strange. Yeah, it's really weird. Can you call your bank and see what happened? I mean, you've had that set up for over a year now? 18 months, actually. The correction slipped out before I could stop it. Right, 18 months. So this is definitely some kind of mistake. The bank probably updated their system or something. I could hear Sarah in the background, her voice sharp with irritation. I couldn't make out the words, but the tone was familiar. The same tone she'd used at brunch when discussing my exclusion from their lives. I suppose I could call them, I said, settling into my reading chair with a cup of tea, though I'm not sure when I'll have time today. There was a pause. In the old days, I would have been on the phone with the bank before David even hung up, apologizing profusely for the inconvenience, promising to fix everything immediately. Well, could you maybe call them this morning? The mortgage company said if the payment doesn't post by Friday, there'll be a late fee. A late fee, I repeated. as if this was news to me. How much is that? I don't know. Probably $150 or something. But that's not the point, Mom. The point is we need to get this sorted out. I noticed how easily he said that, as if his financial problems were automatically mine to solve. David, can I ask you something? Sure. But can we make it quick? I have a client call in 10 minutes. Do you remember what you were doing 18 months ago when I started making your mortgage payments? Another pause. Longer this time. What do you mean? I mean, what was happening in your life that made you unable to pay your own mortgage? Mom, we talked about this. The business was going through a rough patch. You offered to help, temporarily. Had I offered? I tried to remember the actual conversation. David had called, stressed about money. Sarah had been pregnant with their second child, though she'd miscarried in the 4th month. I'd suggested taking over the mortgage payment for a few months to reduce their stress. Temporarily, I repeated, and now it's been 18 months. Well, yeah, but we're still building the client base. You know how it is with consulting. It takes time to establish relationships. In the background, Sarah's voice grew louder. I caught the words, just fix it, and something about Emma's school payment. Mom, Sarah's reminding me that Emma's tuition is also due this week. Can you make sure that payment goes through too? There it was. Not one payment, but multiple payments. Not a request, but an assumption. Not gratitude, but irritation that I wasn't already solving their problems. I'll look into it, I said. When? The question hung in the air between us. When had my son started speaking to me like an employee who wasn't performing adequately? When I have time, David. Mom, this is kind of urgent. I mean, we're talking about our house and Emma's education. Your house, I corrected gently. Emma's education that you chose to fund with private school. What's that supposed to mean? I took a sip of tea, considering my words. It means that these are your responsibilities, sweetheart. I was happy to help temporarily, but perhaps it's time for you to handle your own finances. The silence stretched so long I thought he might have hung up. Are you cutting us off? The way he said it made me sound like a government program being eliminated. Not like a mother who had been supporting her adult son for years. I'm not cutting anyone off, David. I'm just reconsidering my priorities. What the hell does that mean? His tone had shifted from confused to angry. I recognized this progression from his childhood. When David didn't get what he expected immediately, he moved through confusion, frustration, and finally anger. It means I'm 65 years old and I've spent the last 3 years trying to fill the hole your father left behind. Maybe it's time I focused on my own life instead of managing everyone else's. Managing everyone else's? Mom, you help us because you want to. Because you're family. Am I? Are you what? Am I family, David? Or am I a financial resource that you and Sarah tolerate because it's convenient? Another long pause. I could hear Sarah's voice again, more insistent now. Mom, where is this coming from? Of course you're family. Sarah loves you. Emma adores you. Does she? Does she what? Does Sarah love me? Because at brunch yesterday, she told Jennifer that this should be the last year you all pretend I'm part of the family. The silence was absolute now. No background voices, no shuffling papers, no client calls that needed to be taken in 10 minutes. What? You heard me correctly. Mom, I'm sure you misunderstood something. Sarah would never say that. She also said I was needy and that you felt obligated to include me. She suggested that you should gradually phase me out and that I should hire a companion instead of, quote, clinging to family. That can't be right, but his voice had changed. The defensive anger was gone, replaced by something that sounded almost like guilt. Call your bank, David. Ask them to reinstate the automatic transfer for your mortgage. See what they tell you. What do you mean? I mean that there was no banking error. I canceled the automatic payments yesterday. What? Why would you do that? Because I finally understood that I'm not your mother anymore, David. I'm your ATM, and ATMs don't have feelings that need to be considered. Mom, that's not fair. We don't think of you like that, don't you? I hung up before he could answer, and immediately turned off my phone. The house settled into blessed silence around me. For the first time in 3 years, someone else was going to have to figure out how to solve their own financial crisis. Someone else was going to have to make the difficult phone calls and ask for extensions. I finished my tea and went upstairs to pack a suitcase. My sister Helen lived in Charleston, 3 hours away. It seemed like a perfect time for an extended visit. Helen's guest room overlooked Charleston Harbor, And for the first time in years, I woke up without immediately checking my phone for family emergencies. I'd been staying with my sister for 2 weeks, and the silence from my old life was both peaceful and telling. My phone had been buzzing constantly the first few days. David called 17 times on Tuesday alone. Sarah left voicemails that progressed from confused to frantic to angry. Even Emma had texted, asking if I was okay because her parents seemed stressed about something. I'd responded only to Emma. I'm fine, sweetheart. Visiting Aunt Helen. Enjoying the ocean. Helen found me on the porch that morning, coffee in hand, watching the boats in the harbor. Any word from the home front? She asked, settling into the chair beside me. David left another voicemail yesterday. Apparently, Emma had to leave Whitmore Academy. Helen raised an eyebrow. The private school? When I stopped paying tuition, they gave the family 30 days to catch up or withdraw her. David couldn't cover it. Where is she going now? Public school. Roosevelt High. It's actually supposed to be quite good. My sister studied my face. You don't seem upset about this. I considered her observation. 3 weeks ago, the thought of Emma changing schools would have sent me into a panic of guilt and immediate checkbook opening. Now, I felt oddly calm about it. She'll be fine. Emma's smart and adaptable. Maybe being around a more diverse group of students will be good for her. And Sarah? How's she handling the transition? I almost smiled. According to David's voicemails, Sarah had to get a job. She's working at a boutique downtown. Apparently, she's finding the 40-hour work week quite challenging. Helen snorted. I imagine she is. That woman hasn't worked since she married David. 7 years, I said. 7 years of David supporting her while I supported David. The irony wasn't lost on either of us. I'd been subsidizing Sarah's unemployment without even realizing it. My phone buzzed with a text from David. Mom, please call me. We need to talk. This has gone on long enough. As if my absence was some kind of tantrum that I'd eventually get over. Are you going to call him? Helen asked, reading over my shoulder. No. He sounds desperate. He sounds inconvenienced. Helen was quiet for a moment. Margaret, I have to ask. Are you doing this to punish them or to protect yourself? It was a fair question, one I'd been asking myself during the quiet mornings here in Charleston. Both, I think, but mostly to protect myself. From what? From disappearing completely. Helen nodded, understanding immediately. She'd watched our mother do the same thing, giving and giving until there was nothing left of herself except the role of provider and caretaker. That afternoon, I did something I hadn't done in years. I took an art class. Helen had suggested it almost casually, mentioning that the community center offered watercolor painting for seniors. I've never painted anything in my life, I'd protested. So, you've never been 65 and free before either. The class was small, 8 women ranging in age from 55 to 78. None of them knew about my family situation, my money, or my problems. To them, I was just Margaret, a woman learning to paint flowers. It was surprisingly liberating. You have a natural eye for color, the instructor, a cheerful woman named Diane, told me as I struggled with a simple rose. Really? Really? Have you ever considered taking this more seriously? The question stayed with me as I walked back to Helen's house. When was the last time someone had encouraged me to try something new, to develop a talent, to think about my own interests? That evening, Helen showed me the real estate section of the Charleston paper. Just curious, she said innocently. What do you think of this one? It was a small cottage near the water, 2 bedrooms, a screened porch, a garden that needed work but had good bones. It's lovely. Why? It's been on the market for 6 months. The owner is motivated to sell. I stared at the listing, a strange flutter in my chest. Helen, what are you suggesting? I'm suggesting that maybe it's time you stopped visiting Charleston and started living here. I can't just move. My whole life is back home. Is it? What life? Paying other people's bills and being treated like an obligation? That night, I lay in bed thinking about Helen's words. What did I have back home, really? A house full of memories of Robert. A son who called only when he needed money. A daughter-in-law who wanted me out of the picture. A granddaughter who was learning to see me through her parents' eyes. My phone rang at midnight. David again. This time I answered. Mom, thank God. Where are you? I'm fine, David. That's not what I asked. Where are you? I'm with Helen. In Charleston? Mom, you've been gone for 2 weeks. People are starting to ask questions. People. Not him. Not Sarah. People. What kind of questions? About where you are. If you're okay. Mrs. Patterson asked if you were in some kind of facility. Mrs. Patterson was our elderly neighbor who'd always been too interested in everyone else's business. What did you tell her? I told her you were visiting family, but Mom, this is getting ridiculous. When are you coming home? I don't know. What do you mean you don't know? I mean, I'm not sure this is home anymore. That's insane. Of course it's home. Your house is here. Your family is here. David, my house is empty. My family barely tolerates me. What exactly am I coming home to? You're coming home to us, to people who love you. Do you love me, David? Of course I love you. You're my mother. When was the last time you called me just to talk? Not because you needed something. Not because there was a problem to solve. Just to talk. Silence. When was the last time you asked about my day, my interests, my feelings? More silence. When was the last time you treated me like a person instead of a bank account? Mom, that's not fair. Isn't it? I hung up and turned off the phone again. The next morning, I called the real estate agent about the cottage. The cottage was perfect. Built in 1925, it had hardwood floors that creaked pleasantly underfoot, windows that caught the morning light, and a kitchen garden that someone had loved deeply before letting it go wild. The real estate agent, a kind woman named Patricia, seemed genuinely excited that someone wanted to restore it rather than tear it down. The previous owner was an artist, Patricia explained as we walked through the sun-drenched living room. She painted in the back bedroom. See how she had the window enlarged to face north? I could picture an easel there. Canvases stacked against the walls, the smell of turpentine and possibility. How much are they asking? They've come down to $240. I think they'd take $220 if you're serious. $220,000. Less than I'd given David and Sarah in 3 years. I'm serious, I heard myself say. That afternoon, I signed the purchase agreement. Helen cried a little, happy tears she claimed, though I suspected she was also relieved to have family nearby again. I was in the cottage the next day, measuring windows for curtains, when my phone rang. Emma's name on the screen made my heart clench. I'd been strong about ignoring David and Sarah, but Emma was different. Grandma, hi, sweetheart. Are you really buying a house in Charleston? I sat down heavily on the dusty floor. How did you know about that? Dad's been calling lawyers and banks and stuff. He found out about the house. He's really upset. Of course he was. David would see this as the ultimate betrayal. Me spending money on myself instead of giving it to him. Are you upset, Emma? I don't know. I mean, I'd miss you, but Charleston's not that far. And Mom and Dad have been really weird lately. Weird how? They keep having these quiet conversations that stop when I walk in. Mom's been crying. Dad's been really angry about everything. They told me you were just going through a difficult time, but it doesn't feel like that. Smart girl. Emma had always been perceptive. Things have been difficult, yes, but I'm figuring them out. Is it because of money? Dad keeps talking about money. It's not about money. Sweetheart, it's about respect. There was a pause. Can I come visit you? In your new house? Of course you can. Anytime you want. What about Christmas? Could I spend Christmas with you? The question caught me off guard. What about your parents? They're probably going to fight all through Christmas anyway. They've been fighting a lot since you left. My heart broke a little for her, but also felt lighter. Emma wanted to spend Christmas with me, not because I paid for things, but because she enjoyed my company. We'll figure something out, okay? After Emma hung up, I sat in the empty cottage thinking about family dynamics and Christmas mornings and 15-year-old girls who shouldn't have to navigate their parents' financial stress. My phone rang again almost immediately. Sarah this time. I hesitated, then answered. Margaret. Her voice was tight, controlled. Hello, Sarah. We need to talk. I'm listening. Not on the phone, in person. This has gone too far. What has gone too far? You buying a house in Charleston like you're never coming back. You cutting off Emma's tuition without warning? You leaving David to handle everything alone? Everything. As if David had been handling anything before I stopped enabling him. Sarah, I've been handling everything for 3 years. Now it's David's turn. You don't understand the position you've put us in. What position is that? We're going to lose the house. Margaret, the bank won't extend the mortgage forbearance any longer. David's lost 2 clients because he's been so distracted by this situation. Emma's struggling at her new school. Each sentence was designed to make me feel guilty, to make me responsible for their problems. I'm sorry Emma's struggling, but she's smart and resilient. She'll adjust. That's it? That's all you have to say? What would you like me to say, Sarah? I'd like you to come home and fix this mess. It's not my mess to fix. Yes, it is. You created this situation by cutting us off without warning. The accusation hung in the air between us. According to Sarah's logic, my crime wasn't enabling them for 3 years. It was stopping the enabling. Sarah, let me ask you something. Do you remember what you said about me at brunch 3 weeks ago? Silence. You told Jennifer that this should be the last year you pretend I'm part of the family. You said I was needy and that David felt obligated to include me. You suggested gradually phasing me out. That's not... You misunderstood, did I? I was just venting. People say things when they're frustrated. You were planning my exclusion from the family while sitting at a table I was paying for. Wearing clothes I'd helped buy, discussing tuition I was covering. Margaret, please, let's not do this over the phone. Come home. We'll talk everything through. I am home, Sarah. I'm in my new house in Charleston. Your house is here. Your family is here. My family made it very clear that I'm not really part of it. That's not true, isn't it? When was the last time you included me in a family decision? When was the last time anyone asked my opinion about anything that wasn't financial? We include you. You tolerate me. There's a difference. I hung up and immediately turned off the phone. That evening, I drove to the paint store and bought primer, brushes, and 3 gallons of a color called Morning Serenity, a soft blue-gray that reminded me of the harbor at dawn. I was rolling primer on the living room walls when Helen found me the next morning, covered in paint and happier than I'd been in years. David called the house, she said gently. He sounded desperate. What did you tell him? I told him you were painting your new home and couldn't be disturbed. I smiled, loading my roller with more primer. Perfect. He said to tell you that he's sorry, that they all are. I'm sure they are. Sorry that their money supply dried up. Margaret, Helen, I know you think I'm being harsh, but you didn't hear Sarah planning my exile. You didn't spend 3 years being treated like a walking checkbook. Helen picked up a brush and started painting the trim. I'm not criticizing you. I'm proud of you. I just want to make sure you're doing this for the right reasons. What are the right reasons? Because you deserve better. Because you deserve to be valued for who you are, not what you can provide. Then yes, I'm doing this for exactly the right reasons. We painted in comfortable silence, 2 sisters reclaiming their lives 1 brush stroke at a time. That afternoon, a delivery truck arrived with my new furniture. As the delivery men carried in my new sofa, my new dining table, my new bed, I felt something I hadn't experienced in 3 years, the joy of making choices purely for myself. My phone, still turned off, held 17 missed calls and 43 unread messages. I wasn't ready to face them yet. Maybe I never would be. 6 months later, I was deadheading roses in my garden when the car pulled into my driveway. I recognized David's SUV immediately, though it looked older, more worn than I remembered. Through the windshield, I could see Sarah in the passenger seat, her face set in determined lines. I continued pruning, letting them come to me. The morning sun was perfect on my shoulders, and I'd been looking forward to finishing this section of the garden before my painting class this afternoon. My life had developed a rhythm here in Charleston that I treasured. Morning gardening, afternoon art, evening conversations with Helen or my new neighbors. The cottage had transformed over these months into something that felt entirely mine. I'd painted every room myself, choosing colors that made me happy, rather than ones that would photograph well for holiday cards. The kitchen was a warm yellow that caught the morning light. The bedroom was a soft lavender that helped me sleep peacefully. And my art studio, the north-facing room that Patricia had mentioned, was pure white, clean, and full of possibility. Mom. David's voice was careful, controlled. He looked thinner, older. The stress of managing his own life had aged him, but there was something else different about his face. The entitled confidence that had marked his features for years was gone, replaced by something that looked almost like humility. David. Sarah. I nodded politely, the way I might greet acquaintances. Sarah stepped forward, and I noticed she was wearing clothes I'd never seen before. Simple, practical things instead of the designer pieces she used to favor. Her hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, and she wore minimal makeup. She looked younger somehow, less artificial. "Your house is beautiful," she said, glancing around at the cottage garden I'd spent months restoring. "Emma said you'd been working on it yourself, but I didn't realize how extensive it was." "Thank you." I gestured toward the flower beds I'd been working on. The previous owner had good instincts. I just needed to bring it back to life. David was staring at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. "You look different, Mom." "Do I?" "Happier. Relaxed." He paused. "Younger." I supposed I did look different. The chronic tension I'd carried for 3 years was gone from my shoulders. I'd been sleeping better, eating better, moving more. My watercolor instructor had suggested I try yoga, and I'd discovered I loved the quiet focus it required. Helen had talked me into getting highlights in my hair, something I'd never done while Robert was alive, something I'd never considered while I was busy managing everyone else's lives. An awkward silence stretched between us. They'd driven 3 hours to see me, but now seemed uncertain how to begin. I found myself feeling almost sorry for them, remembering how difficult it had been for me to admit my own mistakes over the years. "Can we sit down somewhere and talk?" David asked finally. I gestured toward the screened porch, where I'd set up a small table and chairs. It was my favorite spot in the house, where I drank my morning coffee and watched the boats in the harbor. The table held my current watercolor project, a painting of the garden we were sitting in, and I moved it carefully aside. We settled ourselves like strangers making polite conversation. Sarah kept glancing around, taking in the comfortable furniture, the plants hanging from the ceiling, the stack of art books on the side table. "You're really painting now?" she asked, nodding toward the easel visible through the doorway to my studio. "3 times a week. I'm not very good yet, but I'm improving." "That's wonderful," David said, and he sounded like he meant it. "I never knew you were interested in art." Neither did I until recently. The admission hung in the air between us. How many things about myself had I never explored because I was too busy managing their lives? "How's Emma?" I asked because I genuinely wanted to know. "She's doing well," Sarah answered. "Better than we expected at Roosevelt High. She made the honor roll last semester." "I'm glad to hear that." And I was. Emma had been texting me regularly, sharing photos of her new school, her new friends, her pride in making good grades without the pressure of an expensive private school. "She misses you," David added. "She asks about you constantly. She's welcome to visit anytime. I've told her that. We know. She wants to come for spring break." Sarah hesitated. We were hoping you might say yes." "Of course I'll say yes. Emma is always welcome here." Sarah's relief was visible. "She's been worried that you wouldn't want to see any of us again." I waited. There was obviously more they wanted to say. "Mom," David began, then stopped, rubbing his temples. "I don't know how to do this." "Do what?" "Apologize. Make this right." His voice cracked slightly. "Tell you how sorry I am for everything without sounding like I'm just trying to get something from you again." I studied his face, seeing genuine remorse there for the first time. "You don't owe me an apology, David." "Yes, I do. We both do." He looked at Sarah, who nodded encouragement. "I've been thinking about this for months, trying to figure out where everything went wrong." "And what did you conclude?" "That I turned into someone I don't recognize. Someone Dad would have been ashamed of." His voice was barely above a whisper. "I turned into someone who saw his own mother as a resource instead of a person." Sarah nodded, tears starting in her eyes. "Margaret, I said terrible things about you. I treated you terribly. I was so focused on what you could provide that I forgot you were a person with feelings." "Why?" I asked simply. Why what? Why did you treat me that way? What did I do to deserve it? Sarah looked down at her hands. Nothing. You did nothing wrong. I think I was jealous. Jealous of what? Of how much David loved you. Of how much Emma adored you. I felt like I was competing with you for my own family's attention. It was an honest answer. More honest than I'd expected. So you decided to eliminate the competition. I thought if you weren't around as much, they'd need me more. David reached for Sarah's hand. That was never true. I love you both differently. I should have made that clearer. And the money? I asked. What about the financial dependence? David's face flushed red. I'm ashamed of that. I got so used to your help that I stopped trying to solve my own problems. It was easier to let you handle everything. Easier for whom? For me. For us. He gestured between himself and Sarah. We got comfortable being irresponsible because we knew you'd always bail us out. And now we're learning to be adults. It's harder than I thought it would be. I almost smiled. Most worthwhile things are. We sold the house, Sarah said quietly. I felt a pang of surprise. The house I helped you buy? We couldn't afford the payments. We're renting a smaller place now. It's actually nice. Emma likes having her own bathroom. And your business, David, it's growing. Slowly, but growing. Turns out when you can't rely on someone else's money, you work harder to find clients. I'm proud of you for that. Are you? David's voice was hopeful, almost childlike. Yes, I'm proud that you're taking responsibility for your own life. Mom, I know I don't deserve it, but I want you to know something. What's that? I love you. Not because of what you can do for us, but because you're my mother. Because you taught me right from wrong, even when I forgot those lessons. Because you're the strongest person I know. The words hung in the spring air between us. I'd waited 3 years to hear something like that from him. I love you too, David. I always have. Then can you forgive us? Can we try to have a real relationship this time? I considered the question seriously. I can forgive you, but I won't go back to the way things were. We don't want you to, Sarah said quickly. We want to earn your respect back. We want Emma to see us handling our own problems instead of always running to Grandma for money. And the financial help? We don't want it, David said firmly. We need to prove to ourselves that we can make it on our own. What about emergencies? We'll handle them, like everyone else does. I nodded slowly. Then yes, we can try to build something new. Sarah started crying then, relief and regret mixing in her tears. David looked like a weight had been lifted from his shoulders. There's something else, I said. I've been thinking about Christmas. What about it? I'd like to host it here. For Emma, mainly, but for all of you if you're interested. You'd want us to come? I'd want to cook dinner for my family in my own home, the way your father and I used to do. David smiled for the first time since he'd arrived. I'd like that. They stayed for dinner that night, eating takeout Chinese food on my porch while Emma called to talk to all of us. For the first time in years, conversation flowed naturally. They asked about my painting classes, my garden, my new friends in Charleston. I asked about David's work, Emma's school, their new life without my financial support. When they left the next morning, I felt something I hadn't experienced in a long time, hope for my family's future. But I also felt something else, complete peace with my own choices. As I watched their car disappear down the road, I turned back to my cottage, my garden, my new life. Tomorrow, I had a painting class and lunch with friends who valued my company more than my checkbook. I had learned something important in these months of separation. Love without respect isn't really love at all. It's just dependency dressed up in prettier words. Now, finally, I had the chance to build real relationships based on mutual respect rather than financial obligation. And if that didn't work out, I had something even more valuable. I had myself back. I picked up my pruning shears and returned to my roses, humming softly as I worked in the garden that was entirely, completely, joyfully mine.